Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Tribal Council podcast, where on this podcast, Survivor represents our life, and when it's canceled, so are we. My name is Ethan Kronk, and I'm joined here today by my co-host, Connor Boudreau. And we are here.
Hello, hello.
We are here to talk about episode 8 of Survivor season 49. Um, so we're going to go in order of my personal rankings for who I think is most likely to win, which means, as always, we will start with the most recently eliminated player, MC, aka Michelle Chukwujukwu. Um, Connor, I think you probably liked MC, more than I did anyways. I didn't dislike MC, I just, you know, she was kind of whatever for me, but you seem to like her quite a bit, so why don't you take the floor with MC?
Yeah, MC was a very likable character. Definitely found that she had some ups and downs this season. Uh, but the biggest thing with MC is she was always unfortunately going to be a bigger threat than she wanted it to be let off, and she unfortunately got cut kind of for that reason. But she was very entertaining. She didn't, had some episodes where she got a lot of like fun moments and was quite an important ally to a couple players that weren't involved in this vote process. So it's an unfortunate result for some of them, and a very unfortunate end for MC's game, considering she wasn't in a half bad position in the tribe. So tough one for MC, but unfortunately, that's how Game of Survivor works. Sometimes you get got or get the chance to get everyone else, and sad one, but part of the game.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about how her exit affects some players when we get to those particular players, but it is probably one of the more circumstantial votes, I think, of the season so far in terms of how it will impact certain players' games. Of course, that's something that remains to be seen, but um, with that being said, we'll move on to somebody who I don't know is impacted that much by this vote out. Yet again, in last place, I have Christina Mills, and I like Christina. She seems like a fun personality, which is why it's a little bit confusing that she only has 13 confessionals over 8 episodes. But she did find an idol this episode. Now does that make things better or worse for her? I would argue worse, considering she still only got 2 confessionals. But maybe she'll make some sort of play with that idol. That's not what I'm predicting. I actually have my predictions for what I think is going to happen with her idol. But Connor, what do you think about Christina this episode in general?
I mean, we kind of had the same thought with what we thought's going to happen with that idol, and we can get into that if you want. But to actually more or less talk about Christine to start, she unfortunately still suffering from being very under edited and doesn't really get a ton of screen time this episode. Even with the idol find, most of her content comes before they even get to the challenge, and obviously isn't really shown on screen after much with the reward and all. That being said, what content we do actually get from Christina does show a little bit of strategic prowess and is kind of good to see a little more into her head of where she's hoping to take the game. But I mean, it's not a big or deep look, given that it's a pretty small amount of time she talks about her strategy, and it just isn't really developing Christina out to being much more, I think, going forward.
Yeah, and to touch on where we see her idol going, well, to put it bluntly, I see her idol going into Soph's pocket. Uh, I think the fact that she's gotten so little content, at first when she found the idol, I was like, what the hell? This is weird. Like, they wouldn't usually give somebody who ends up finding an idol such little content leading up to it. And then I thought about a little thing that I know about, the Survivor edit, where a lot of times players who get taken out in sort of a more unfortunate way or maybe get screwed over by a twist or an advantage tend to get under-edited. And if Christina's the first person to ever have an idol successfully stolen from them by a knowledge is power advantage, that could be an explanation for why she's been so under-edited. Because even if she doesn't go home that episode, even if that idol isn't used to take her out specifically, having it stolen from her, of course, isn't going to be isn't going to be great. And it's something that I could see them sort of under editing someone over, so that you don't get too attached, basically. Um, and I hope that Christina doesn't get too attached to her idol. Um, but with that being said, another familiar face down here at the bottom of the list, I have Sophie Segretti. Now, I actually think this was a good episode for Sophie, but definitely not good enough to scrape her way out of this bottom tier. But I'm interested to hear Connor's thoughts on Sophie's edit this episode.
I think this was Sophie's best overall episode. I know last episode things went her way. The connections look big. It looks like she's growing her circle and she's finally getting some power in the game. But I think this episode's actually better because we got a chance to see Sophie have to fight. We got to see her dig her way out of what looked like a pretty deep hole, where for a lot of the time post challenge, you think, okay, if Rizzo uses that idol, Sophie could be in big trouble. And then eventually conversation spins around to, well, it might not be Rizzo. It might be, maybe we go after like Jawan, and then she starts to over strategize, overplay her hand, and then she has to kind of dig her way out of this hole. And by the end of the episode, we see her walking back towards tribe camp. So she got I think, a second chance, and I think this is a really good episode for her to almost have that bit of a wake up call, and we can see how she reflects and starts to correct her game because she tried to take a big swing and it failed. Can she rebound from this when she was given a second chance to go back to the beach when she very easily could have been voted out in MC's place?
I also think like the fact that she is portrayed as sort of a threat now, like people are kind of scared of her, is like potentially a good sign. Obviously, it's a good sign that maybe she's not managing her threat level well, but usually winners will get some sort of like, hey, I think this person might be a threat at some point in the game. And Sophie's definitely getting that now, as well as just more consistent content with four confessionals this episode is a pretty decent amount. Following 6 confessionals last episode is definitely nothing to scoff at. So I do think that, well, her edit overall still isn't great. This episode is definitely a good mark for Sophie. And we'll see how things go moving forward. Maybe she could scrape her way up above one or two other players, but ultimately, having such an abysmal pre-merge edit, it's kind of hard to put her any higher than this on the list. Um, Also, totally overplayed. I think if you're gonna sort of volunteer yourself as the backup in case Rizzo plays an idol, you have to be willing to commit to that risk, because that's a risk that you're taking, but you're taking it to earn social capital with people. Like, hey, yeah, I'm willing to do this for you guys to make this plan go smoothly. I'm willing to take this risk and, have it potentially be me going home if things go wrong, so that we can actually take Rizzo out and make this move. To do that and then go back and be like, okay, but actually I'm going to throw a Hinky vote onto Jawan. And I'm going to tell MCya about that so that she doesn't get spooked, obviously. But it's like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to commit to the risk, or, maybe you tell Jawan right off the bat, hey, I think you might make the most sense as the backup target. And whether Jawan goes along with that or not is another question, obviously. But I do think she definitely sort of overplayed her hand and tried a little bit too hard to have it both ways. But I mean, as we'll see later in this list, actually, sometimes you can have your cake and eat it too. But that's something that won't be talked about until closer to the end of this episode. So Um, as for our next player, we have Alex Moore. And I just wanted to say congratulations to Alex. For the first time ever, he has more confessionals this episode than the last. Um, Obviously that wasn't enough to move him up on my list, but it's definitely not a bad thing. Um, what do you think about Alex this episode, Connor?
I think, honestly, Alex, as much as the numbers went up, the content didn't. And when you look at where the confessionals are in the episode, over half of them are the night fallout from the vote, just talking to players that were on the bottom and basically gaining the conclusion that he has more power than he might have thought or realized, but then doesn't really tell us what he's going to do with it significantly enough that like it might come to fruition anytime soon. He just says that he's going to keep his options open, and he talks to Sophie for a little bit and then gets a confessional where he's basically just talking about Soph. So like I I wouldn't say this was necessarily a great episode for Alex. I think we need to see some more out of him before I'm going to really throw him back in the race. But it wasn't a negative episode. It wasn't bad. Just a very neutral episode for him, I would say.
He also gets to be the one to narrate Christina finding her idol. Like she's the he's the main narrator behind that instead of Christina, which I think is telling, but um I think that's the real like upside to his edit this episode is the fact that he got that. But at the end of the day, it's just not quite enough. Um, Moving on, we have Jawan Pitts. Now this is another player who I think had a pretty good episode, but not good enough to move them up on the list. And we actually have another one of those coming up right after Jawan. But I mean, Jawan, he was in a sort of power position this episode. Um, he was able to, rekindle a relationship a little bit with Rizzo and Savannah to some extent as well. I think potentially his options moving forward might be a little bit more open depending on how certain players react to this most recent vote. Um, but at the end of the day, he gets a good amount of content, and he's definitely I think going to be a main character for the season moving forward. Just as he pretty much has been for most of the season now. Um, the main issue is really just MC going home over Sophie. The fact that I think the edit was really portraying that for the sake of Jawan and Sage's game, it should be Sophie going home. Definitely doesn't bode well for Jawan. Um, but aside from that, this wasn't a solid episode for him. What do you think, Connor?
To avoid kind of spewing off a lot of the same information, Jawan continues to be fun more than his strategy shows that he's going to be a really good player. Because, yeah, this vote result probably isn't ideal for his game, but yet he was still in charge of helping dictate it. He still had a lot of power in deciding what happened. So he's in a decent spot in the game where he has some power and yet makes a move that you would probably wouldn't say is favorable for the outcome of him going further or even winning the game. So it's it's an interesting situation when you look at the strategic standpoint for Jawan, but in terms of entertainment, the guy doesn't miss. He is constantly a fun addition to the season and is a very likable character for the most part, I would argue. So, it's always a good time when you see him on screen, but isn't necessarily going to be good gameplay every time he's on screen. TBD on that one.
That reminds me of one of my favorite moments from the episode. One of the funniest moments in the episode to me. When Jeff was like handing out the like bandanas for like the team divisions, and Jawan just for no reason whatsoever, as he's as Jeff is handing him his like bandana, is like, "Do you like me, Jeff?"
Do
Like,
you like me, Uncle Jeff?
well, yeah, he probably said Uncle Jeff. That's right. But it's just like,
Oh yeah, 100%.
why are we seeking validation from Jeff at this random time, at the most random time imaginable? Just like, hey, by the way, Jeff, do you like me? It's just such a weird thing to do. I don't know. It was so strange to me, and it's kind of funny. Um, I don't know if it like speaks to like a greater insecurity in Jawan. I mean, I think we've kind of gotten a sense that he might not be the most um like self-assured person, but or if it's just something that came to his mind to say for some reason and he just said it and didn't think about how strange of a thing it is to say, but I just found it very weird and very just funny in the most random way. With that
Yeah,
being,
I don't know. Juwan's fun, but his gameplay continues to be up and down. Too much.
yeah, well, I'm back and forth too, like going from being like loyal to a fault to the Uli Alliance to just completely flipping on them to take out Shannon and Nate to like kind of flipping back to them, like kind of just going along with Rizzo voting for MC, and it's just like there's playing the middle, and then there's kind of just like being indecisive, and I think Jawan is kind of more the latter than the former. Um,
Mhm.
but that I think that's a good segue into another player who I think is maybe more the former than the latter, and that is Sage Aaron's Nichols. Um, I think like the contrast between Sage and Jawan is very interesting because like when Sage flips, it's after a lot more build up, a lot more of us seeing that Sage knows that she is on the outs of the Uli Alliance and that she, is gonna have to flip on them. She also does it at at the first opportunity, basically. In contrast to Jawan, who throughout the whole swap was just undyingly loyal to the Uli Alliance, despite very clearly not being at the forefront of it, just shutting down Matt and Jason's attempts to work with him, um, and then ultimately flipping on them, and it's just kind of like, oh, why is Jawan flipping? He hasn't really expressed that he understands that that's the best thing for his game. Compared to Sage, who throughout the entire season is very much like, yeah, flipping on the Ulis would be the best thing for my game, and she does it. And when she ultimately works with them a little bit this episode, it feels a little bit less like she's just kind of wishy-washy and more like she understands like what the best thing is for her game strategically. And I think that's why I have Sage above Jawan, and I think actually there's a pretty major gap for me between Sage and Jawan. But Sage still hasn't clawed her way into really being a contender to me. I think you know, it's my top four that I really consider contenders, and Sage sort of sits just outside of that. But I think this was a decent episode for Sage. I think even though MC went home and that wasn't portrayed as like the best thing for Sage's game, we at least see Sage try to tell Jawan like, look, we should vote out Sophie. Sophie voting out Sophie would make more sense for a game. So we at least get to see that Sage knows what's best for her game and has the strategic understanding of the game more so than Jawan does. It just doesn't end up working out for her that she's able to get her way. Um, but I think that puts her in a much better position edit wise than Jawan this episode. What do you think about Sage, Connor?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying there, and I'll even take it a step further. I think Sage is the beginning of I can actually consider her a potential contender to win. she's on the bottom of the barrel of that list. But this episode really gives us the first insight to how she is planning to navigate this game, and that she's socially and strategically aware enough of what she might need to do to get further in this game, the kind of people that she might need to keep around to get further in this game and to win. So this episode really starts to open things up as a good, back from the last couple episodes. Right now, we've seen 4 straight episodes with at least 6 confessionals in a row as well out of Sage. So Sage can start to be taken a little seriously here on lists. And as much as I ever in the same spot, she's, right in the middle. If you look at it from numbers perspective, she isn't in the middle. She has power, and if she uses it correctly, could go really far and win the game with it. But it does take the right moves, and time will have to tell whether she makes them or whether people make them for her. That'll be left to see.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, at the very least, voting on Nate is a big move that she can hang her hat on. But that brings us to someone who's dropped quite a bit on my list. And that's Sophie Belluti. Mostly, I don't know, just getting 2 confessionals, especially after what happened last episode, just feels kind of weird. She kind of talks about how she might have to cut ties from the Uli Alliance, which I don't necessarily think is a great thing for her, because it's just kind of like, who else does she have ties with other than Alex? Like from an edit standpoint, she has these ties with Alex, but even those ties, as of the merge, have been portrayed as, being significantly weaker than they once were, to the point where her Uli friends really come off as her only real solid, like, allies. And we don't see her really starting to form these new connections this episode. Now maybe we'll get that next episode, and if we get that in a significant way next episode, I might be willing to put her a little bit higher. But it's the fact that she gets 2 confessionals after getting blindsided. Her path forward in the game is not super clear. The ties that she has to work with now aren't super clear. If she is really cutting ties with the Uli Alliance, and if she isn't, then it's like, why is that the only content we're getting from her this episode? Is her basically saying that that's what she plans on doing? Like, it just feels very inconsistent and or maybe incongruent is a better word, but also inconsistent in terms of the amount of content she's getting. She already had that 1 confessional episode that was kind of like, okay, I can definitely forgive that, but it's not necessarily amazing. And now with the 2 confessional episode at a critical point in the game, it's just kind of like, where does that leave her? Like, it feels weird. Her edit feels weird now, and maybe I've overreacted to it by putting her all the way at 4th, but that's where I have her for now.
And you know what? I'll follow up on that by saying I still have her a little bit higher on my list, but I completely hear what you're saying, and it's part of why she did go down from, I had her first last week, down a little bit this week. Is, yeah, we had the cool off episode. Episode 5 didn't get a ton of content. 1 confessional really looked like, okay, we can look past this. If that's the only episode, no big deal. But this episode, basically 95% of we seeing her discuss things on screen is talking about the outcome of the previous vote, and then how Alex is really what she might have to fall back on. So there's just nothing strategic or no kind of like social gameplay to try and fix things. And you feel like the winner of a season would get a chance to do those things. Now, maybe, as you said, episode 9, she comes in swinging, she makes moves, the connections happen. But if not, what's the build from a big blindside that she was betrayed by people, and she looked to be in such a great position? Now it looks like she's still in a good position, but she's second guessing it.
Also, like, if Alex is what she has to fall back on, then she's really more so playing Alex's game. Like, if she's gonna work with Alex and the Hinas, Alex has all those connections with the Hinas. Sophie has nothing. Sophie has no connections with the Hinas. The only Hinas that she had met pre-merge are out of the game now, and but that might not totally be right, actually. I don't know about, like, the second swap. She did meet MC, who's out of the game now, actually. So yeah, all of the Hinas that she met pre-merge are out of the game now. Um, so if she's gonna start to form bonds with Steven and Sophie and Christina, she's gonna have to start to form them soon, you know? This can't be like a like I don't know. It's just otherwise again, she's just playing Alex's game. Alex already has bonds with Sophie. Alex already has bonds with Steven. We haven't really seen Alex and Christina bond, but they've at least met, you know? So it's like um really if she's gonna work with Alex, she has to be able to convince Alex to turn on the Hinas at some point, like maybe work the middle with her a little bit. Otherwise, she's just sort of forcing herself into this position where she's in this alliance where she's close with Alex and nobody else, and Alex is close to everyone else, and it just wouldn't work for her. And the fact that that's sort of what she's expressing as her plan moving forward doesn't sit right with me. Um,
I will add to that quickly in saying the only other connection she could possibly have from a swap situation is Jawan, which means technically she could move into a four-person alliance with potentially maybe like Jawan, Sage, Alex, and herself. Problem
right.
is that isn't shown on screen being a significant connection. They don't even really talk about Jawan and Sophie because they show Sophie connecting with every other person from Uli at that time, being Nate, Rizzo, Savannah. So it would be kind of odd that they wouldn't have at least flashed on screen Jawan and Sophie talking. But
Yeah, I don't think we
I
see
don't
a
know.
single. I don't think we see them interact like pretty much at all. So the idea of them being like
Definitely,
close allies moving forward is,
it's
uh,
far fetched. Yeah.
yeah. um, and that's really the thing, like that really is holding me back on Sophie is the fact that she just her only connections at this point, like the only people who are left in the game who we've actively seen her interact with, pretty much are Rizzo, Savannah, and Alex. It's those three. And I just don't think that that's a great sign for her. Even, well, we'll talk about like, actually, I'll just move on right now. Steven Ram. Steven, we saw him and Savannah interacting this episode. In an episode where Steven is irrelevant for the second half of the episode because he doesn't go to tribal, we see him interacting with Savannah, somebody who we never met pre-merge, who he has no strategic connection to whatsoever. We still see them interact. We see Savannah open up to Steven and be vulnerable with him. And I think that's like a massive thing for both him and Savannah's edits. That they're able to form these connections, whether they're purely social or maybe down the line strategic as well. It's a lot better than someone like Sophie who really doesn't have much left moving forward. Um, so um, aside from that, with Steven, I mean, he gets the post tribal confessional of wow, awesome that I was able to survive that. I got my way. I'm feeling on top of the world now. Um, Steven does lose MC this episode, and he hasn't found out yet. It is definitely not great to see his closest ally go home in a tribal that he doesn't even attend. That's probably my biggest gripe with his edit right now. Because him and he had plenty of allies on Hina where he didn't need to be portrayed as being such a duo with MC. If she was gonna end up going home in a situation where he wasn't even there, um, and it definitely hurts his overall game moving forward. But aside from that, I mean, he had a good edit on original Uli overall. He was put on a swap tribe that, like, if we're doing complex tribe theory on the swap tribe, his New Kelly was probably the complex tribe for that first swap. The second swap, I mean, kind of hard to really like quantify. He goes to tribal, but like, you know, it's not. I don't think the second swap is gonna be what really matters here. And so far in the merge, he's gotten a good amount of content, pretty positive content. So it's hard not to have Steven as a contender at this point, despite his original Hina roots. But Connor, what do you think about Steven?
I ultimately moved Steven even a little bit further down than you did following that last episode. It's really not a good sign when your best or one of your best allies goes home and you're not even there to do anything about it. You don't get a vote, you don't get a say, and you're going to find out, a full half day later that all of a sudden you're one of your best allies just got voted off. I think Steven's content this episode definitely had some interest to it when he was speaking with Savannah, but I ultimately think that matters more for his longevity in the game than his ability to win the game. And I think that might be, in my mind, the first sign that Steven won't win the game. If there even was a chance for, someone to not have come from that, Red Uli tribe to start off, I think this was the nail in the coffin potentially. I'm not completely rolling him out because, again, he has still been a perennial contender for a lot of the season and has a lot of great flashes, but this episode kind of didn't really sit well with me editing wise because we really didn't get enough of Steven pushing or like discussing, and it was really just him building one key connection that could help him down the line. I look at that as more of a longevity than a winning play.
The other thing I'll say to that is like that's a lot to get for an episode where you don't even go to tribal. Like, there's not much strategic content that he could have gotten this episode, considering we just got off of a tribal where he got his way and he's now like in a power position and at the top of the game. Um and then he doesn't go to tribal, so for the second half of the episode we're just not gonna see him. I think anything that he gets in an episode like that is, it's all kind of gravy. It's like there's not much that we needed from him this episode given the circumstances. I don't think there's really anything that we needed from him aside from, at least a couple of confessionals. So like the fact that he got, a few confessionals plus a good moment with Savannah, mind you, that moment was always going to be included for the the purposes of Savannah's edit, I feel like. So it might not necessarily mean that much, but I still think it's something when we really didn't need anything from him, I don't think, to keep him in contention after last episode, given the circumstances of the tribal council and him not going to it, basically.
I'll counter I'll counterpoint with this to close on Steven. We got more content out of Alex this episode. And Alex also didn't attend tribal, and Alex also got what he wanted and got to say that in confessional. So to me, I think I would have liked a little bit more from Steven, but again, it was, to your point, anything was still something good. If we got nothing, that would have been a cause for concern.
Alex only gets as much content as he does, though, because he was there when Christina found the idol. So, like, that's circumstantial content in of itself. So it's not really something like you can't really hold it over Steven that he can get that. He wasn't there when Christina found the idol. If Steven was there when Christina found the idol, for all we know, he would have gotten all the confessionals about it, and Alex would have nothing. But because
Yeah,
Alex happened to be there when Christina found this idol, which is necessary content to show, they can't cut that out of the episode. And Christina is such an unimportant character that we have to have Alex narrate this now instead of Christina. It's like The only thing I could say is like maybe Steven could have gotten more content about Savannah's like opening up. Uh, but even then, like, uh, the other thing I'll say is Alex is somebody who needed that content in order to stay in contention. Um, because of how little content he's been getting recently, whereas Steven has been getting plenty of content recently. So to get a little bit less from him in an episode with these sorts of circumstances just doesn't mean as much as it does for Alex. But um also the difference of one confessional isn't much at the end of the day. But um we can move on to my second place contender now, somebody who's moved up a decent bit, or really back up to where she was before. I have Savannah Louie. Now Savannah still holds on to her spot as the highest confessional player in the game with 55 over 8 episodes. It's a, it's a really it's quite a bit to be honest. But this was a fantastic episode for Savannah. I'll let Connor talk about Savannah first because I have quite a bit to say about her, so I don't want to step on his toes too much. Um,
Yeah. First couple takeaways that I think matter a lot here. Um, we get a really big moment where we see Savannah win immunity. She gets a reward from this that is coming in form of a extra vote, and because of how tribal goes, gets to keep it. So that's always a nice thing. So extra vote wins a challenge over someone that was considered a fairly good competitor, and ultimately gets to help save her number one ally's idol and just his neck in the game, somehow gets to influence the vote in a big way and gets a result that would be favorable for them. And again, speaking to that Steven connection, we'll see in due time who that conversation was more important for their edit. But it seems pretty obvious that, you know, that connection had to be made, a bridge had to be amended on Savannah's part, and we immediately see it happen. We immediately see her go to work and take control of her own game again. So I think a massive episode for Savannah in the right direction. The other thing I'm going to point out, this was, if I'm not mistaken, the highest number of confessionals a single player has gotten in an episode this season. And that is a pretty big thing to have happen this late into the game for a player's odds to be at the very least in the finale. I would be absolutely shocked if Savannah is not still in the game come finale night. And that might be a big reaction based off of kind of one episode. But I mean, if you look at the fact that she's averaging almost 7 confessionals an episode and she has the biggest number middle of the season, right when you expect a player like her to need it, that's a very big statement for me that she is clearly a power player on this season. And also, we get to see a very likable side of her too. So we get to see Savannah open up, right? Very powerful moment, shared in the shelter. She really starts to open up and give us her character in a new light, right? Which makes anyone that wasn't necessarily her biggest fan potentially change her perspective, right? So I think this was a all in all fantastic episode for Savannah. And I think this is a really important moment to help define the fact that she is a superstar for the season.
yeah. The only thing I'll point out is like a player, well, not that I'm really comparing Savannah to this player, but like in season 46, Q uh got the most confessionals in any given episode. Well, not actually the most, but on episode 8 he had 15 confessionals, which at the time was more than anyone else had received, and he didn't make the finale. And I think it's a pretty common pattern to have somebody who goes out right before the finale get get like a ton of content. So like I could see Savannah maybe going out in sixth. Like that's definitely a possibility in my mind. Um, like another player I'll kind of point out is like Genevieve on season 47. They even went out of their way to change the finale so that she would be the last person voted out before the finale. Um, or I don't know about season 48 if that pattern really continues, but like quite a few seasons we get sixth place like right before the finale, or fifth place in the case of Genevieve, but still right before the finale, get a ton of content at some point in the season, or just a ton of content overall. Um, so I mean, I do think that Savannah, based on her edit, is pretty much guaranteed at least final six, but I wouldn't necessarily be terribly shocked if she did end up going home right before the finale as like that last sort of like shocking vote before the last episode. Because they like to do that, you know. Um,
To that point, I'll quickly add before you get into yours. Genevieve is a great example of like they had to change it so that they could do this format for the purposes of trying to keep the episodes entertaining. If she
yeah,
comes in fifth, I'm count it the same way as if she was in the finale. But yeah, I get your point.
yeah. Um,
Yep,
another
it's the way.
Now, as for my thoughts on Savannah, so first of all, you know, like Connor said, took out a big threat to her game, obtained an extra vote, and like was able to work with the Sage and Jawan to some extent, which I think is good. Um, Personal content sort of brought her from a villain that like I think a lot of people maybe were rooting against to someone who's a lot more rootable, someone who feels like a lot more of an underdog. Um, but what I really want to talk about is sort of the themes of the season so far, because that's a major um, part of analyzing the edit of a season of Survivor, and it's something we haven't really touched on this podcast yet. So the themes of the season that I think are really emerging. First one is authenticity. A lot of the characters embody in some way authenticity, whether it's in a positive way or a negative way. Um, I think about Shannon, who's somebody who was portrayed as very inauthentic, very disingenuous, kind of saying what she needed to say to sort of work people. And it's kind of what got her voted out, with Sage not really vibing with that. Sage being somebody who doesn't really have much of a filter, is very true to herself, maybe sometimes to a fault. Um, but what I wanted to point out is that Savannah was actually the first person to really point out sort of Shannon's inauthenticity. One of the like first things that Savannah says about Shannon is to sort of paraphrase, basically like I'm fine with going along with Shannon. This was after Shannon's like meditation with the whole Uli tribe. She's like, I'm fine to go along with Shannon and act like everything's kumbaya, but eventually things are gonna have to get real. And I think Savannah's really been portrayed as somebody who strikes a good balance of knowing when to be genuine and authentic and when to maybe put up a front, or when to um sort of work people a little bit more, because you have to be able to do both on Survivor. The only thing is, like, up until now, there have been times where people have sort of called Savannah out on being disingenuous in their confessionals, and sometimes they're right, but sometimes that's not really what we're getting as viewers. It's like, this person saying that Savannah seems to be disingenuous, but like, is she really being disingenuous? It kind of feels like that's just something that's being assumed about her. Um, and I think it's very interesting to have this player who really represents like the way that even when you are being genuine to yourself, and even when you are being like very real and authentic, uh sometimes you're just going to be misperceived. Um, and I think Savannah's a player who's been sort of misunderstood. I don't think she's like a perfect angel or anything, but I do think that she's been portrayed as more of a villain by the other players than she really has been. And the personal content that she got this episode really plays well into that, because she talks about how, in her old job as a reporter, um, the other people sort of that worked there sort of felt like she had quote unquote stolen her job from someone else, and they just completely shunned her. Outside of like she said, when the cameras were on, they were talking, they were joking, they were having a good time. Cameras off, nothing. And they would just talk about her right behind her back, within, you know, uh, within earshot of her, and it plays into sort of what's been happening to her this season, where people are sort of treating her as the villain. They're talking about her as like a mean girl when, I don't think she's been particularly mean to anyone. I don't think she's been particularly cruel or villainous per se. Um, and this personal content side sort of exemplifies that, and also like shows us a more personal side of Savannah to make her a much more rootable player. Um, and then the other sort of theme that I think we're seeing with the season is just like comparing Survivor to a horror movie. Jawan has made that like has used that metaphor multiple times, and it's been very heavily highlighted, even in the preview for the season. So I do think that a player like Savannah, who's sort of feared by the other players, who's definitely seen as, like a threat, is going to be a pretty good contender. Um, that being said, there's just, I think, a lot to think about with Savannah and her edit. I think that she's been a very interesting character on the season, and I think this episode really developed her in the way that she needed to be developed to continue being a contender. But there are still aspects of her edit that are just a little bit too overtly negative for me to put her in that top spot yet. I think we need to see more of Savannah, being more humanized and being more rootable, and maybe even facing some more adversity before I can really put her at the top spot. Um, so that's sort of all I have to say about Savannah for now. Um, are you ready to move on to our final player, Connor?
Absolutely. And we have the same top player. Do you want to take
Awesome.
it away?
Hell yeah. For my number one spot, I have the man, the myth, the legend, Rizgod, Riz God, baby. Um, this is truly a momentous day. The Riz God has finally taken his rightful throne at the top spot on my list. He's winning Survivor 49. He's gonna win Survivor 50. Um, I'll let you take it away though first, Connor. I'll let you give your thoughts on Rizzo.
I mean, the key takeaways from this episode that really stuck with me, first things first, got a bit of a cool off last episode, only two, things don't go his way, bounce right back, five confessionals, involved in the vote, things look right off the bat, and yet he doesn't panic. He scrambles pretty quickly, he starts scrambling hard, and things all of a sudden turn right in his favor. Things look like the world has opened up Rizzo. And it just works out pretty flawlessly that he gets the person he wants out. His best ally gets an advantage and gets to help contribute to those discussions. He gets to reopen those connections with his old Uli members without putting too much negative on him in regards to the vote results from last night. Whereas, like some of the other top contenders, we have to spend a little bit more time talking about the negative of last night. He immediately spins it as positive. So, if we're looking into some of the key components that have been highlighted this season. You mentioned authenticity. Rizzo is about the embodiment of it. He does not have this massive change of character at any given moment and has the ability to, at times, play a facade when needed, but really just stays pretty true to himself and a very authentic, likable character. So I see this episode as another good reason to keep him at the top of your rankings if you're considering real contenders for the season. Rizzo has to be considered.
Yeah. What I really liked from Rizzo this episode was the fact that he immediately talks to Juwan and he's immediately just like, hey man, I get it. You did what you felt like you had to do. Um, uh, no hard feelings. Like I'm still good to move forward with you. Like it's totally cool, man. Even if that's not necessarily how he felt, even if he was, upset, even if he felt betrayed, being as cool about it as he was, and being sort of welcoming and inviting to like the potential of continuing that relationship moving forward, despite the fact that he was blindsided. Now, obviously, um, he's not going to trust Jawan as much as he did, but I just feel like he handled that so well. Like he didn't let his emotions get in the way. He didn't get overwhelmed or get overly emotional. He just was just very cool about it, very level-headed and reasonable, and kept that relationship strong despite what had happened. And I think it really paid dividends for him this episode. Uh, the fact that he very easily could have settled on Sophie going home. It's somebody who he isn't aligned with whatsoever. It's someone who's seen as a threat, but MC going home felt like a better move for his game. It's somebody who's probably more of a threat to him. Somebody who's probably closer to the likes of Jawan and Sage, who are sort of in the middle now. Somebody who definitely has more power and more connections overall in this game, and somebody who probably is only good for his and Savannah's game to see MC go home, and yet he makes it happen. And I just think that's the mark of a truly great player. The fact that he didn't settle for a move that just like worked out okay for him. He put in the work to make something happen that like actively pushed him forward in the game in a really major way. Um, do I think there's as much going for his edit as Savannah's? I don't think he necessarily plays into the themes as strongly or as uh obviously, but he doesn't have the flaws weighing him down that Savannah has. Now, having a flawless edit, is that necessarily a great thing? It's kind of hard to say. I could see um Rizzo is maybe more of like a fallen angel and maybe a fourth or fifth place who like would have won if he made a final three or something along those lines. But at this point, I could also very easily see him winning. Um, but we'll just have to see um how the rest of the season goes. Um, really though, I love Rizzo. I think he's a fun character. I think he's a surprisingly like great player. I mean, who would have thought this like 25-year-old kid from Yonkers who calls himself the Riz God would actually be like a really good Survivor player? Um, it's awesome to see. Um, Anything else to say, Connor, about this episode?
I did want to go over the challenge a little bit because I thought the challenge was an interesting split on how that was run and just the result of it in general. For starters, with the challenge itself, the format of going group versus group in that specific style of challenge is something we haven't really seen in a long time. Uh, those that challenge itself has been run quite a few different times, and all kinds of different people have won it. And I find typically it's someone that just seems to be very determined, like strong-willed, and Savannah pulled it out, which I definitely wasn't expecting, but it's a very good positive on her part. And I mean, the advantage that comes with it too is going to play a massive part in this game going forward. What did you think of the challenge?
It's cool. I will say determination is one thing. Small feet is another thing. A lot of people with small feet end up winning this season or not season. What? A lot of people. That was a weird thing to speak. A lot of people with small feet end up winning this challenge, and I don't know. Savannah is probably one of, if not the smallest people on the cast, so I'd imagine she probably has the smallest feet. I haven't spent a bunch of time looking at them or anything, but you know, I can infer based on logic and reasoning that she might have the smallest feet. And that might have played a pretty significant role in why she won this challenge. It just favors people who are built like that. Um, but I do think determination is part of it, and I do think Savannah was pretty determined. I think the twist, I don't love it. I don't think it was necessary, but it made for a good episode at the end of the day, so I'm not gonna complain too much about it. Um, and definitely worked in Savannah and Rizzo's favor. That's for sure. I think this is the start of them really digging their way out of this hole that they found themselves in. So, um, yeah, that's all I really have to say about it.
All right. Is that everything for the episode? Anything else you want to touch up on, or?
Not really. I think we kind of went over everything that I wanted to talk about for this episode.
All right. With that said, the pod has spoken.